Welcome. This series is provided by the North Central Climate Collaborative. And as way of logistics, I have disabled the ability for you to unmute yourself. So as we go through, if you have any questions at all, feel free to drop those in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat box throughout. At the end of the presentation today, there will be a few poll questions to answer to help us with our evaluation. If you do have any issues with audio or technical issues throughout, you can drop that in the chat, or I will put my cell phone number in the chat just shortly for you to use if needed. We are delighted today to have Melissa Widhalm with the Midwestern Regional Climate Center joining us to talk about hopefully a timely topic for some of us and hopefully not a timely topic for others, snowfall climatology. So with that, I will hand it over to Melissa and let her get started.
Well, hello there. Thank you. You hear me okay? Can I get a thumbs up? Excellent. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining. I know it's a few days before winter break for a lot of folks, myself included. And so I'm very impressed that we have nearly 100 people already joining us to get the scoop on snowfall in the north central US. So I'll go ahead and share my screen so we can go ahead and get this started. All right. So as Hans had said, my name is Melissa Widhalm. I am with the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. And let's see if we can get this to go forward. There we go. So we are actually one of 6 centers across the country that are funded by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to provide climate data and information to a variety of users across the US. And so we focus on the Midwest, but a lot of our tools you'll see are applicable to the entire US. And we do serve any sector that is in need of climate data, not just folks in the Midwest and not just agriculture, not just city managers. We really serve everyone, but we do have a particular focus on agriculture and water resources. And so really our mission at the center is to provide high quality climate data and data summaries across for people across the region. We are keeping our finger on the pulse of regional climate conditions and their impacts, providing people specialized historical climate data sets, and also doing coordinated applied research as applicable. So a lot of the timescales we work on are really our current period in time, the historical data record, looking at the last 100 years of observational records, give or take, and really trying to put today's climate into that historical context. You can see our website there at the bottom of the page as well, mrcc.purdue.edu. And so greetings from West Lafayette. That's where I join you from today, West Lafayette, Indiana. The MRCC was at Illinois, the University of Illinois, for more than 30 years, but just a few months ago, it actually moved from Illinois to Purdue. And so if you're familiar with the MRCC, but you did not know that we moved, now you're informed of that. We are led by Dr. Beth Hall, and myself, I serve as the Associate Director as well as Regional Climatologist for the center. Now, I do want to give a shameless plug that we are looking to expand, right? We just moved over here to Purdue. We have a few vacancies. We are actually actively hiring 2 climate data programmers right now. So if you know anybody or if you yourself is a computer programmer really interested in working with a fun, energetic team here at Purdue, please send me an email. My contact information is listed there, and it'll be listed again at the end of the presentation. So really my goal here for us today, I want to share with you a suite of climate tools that can provide us with snow-related historical and real-time data here for the North Central US. And so I'm going to attempt to do a live demo of one of those tools. The rest of them will just be screen captures. But really, I want you to be able to walk away feeling like you know where to go if you are looking for snow-related data, snow-related information, whether it's historical climate context or it's real-time what's happening right now. So that's really the goal for today. And I do want to mention we will have a resource page, a PDF, that'll have links to all of the tools that I talk about here today. So you don't have to worry about taking screen captures and quickly trying to Google to find URLs. All of that will be provided for all of the tools shown today, as well as a few other ones that we just won't have time to get to. All right, so to just give myself and everybody else on the call a little bit of information about who all is joining, and to make sure you're awake and hearing me, we're gonna do a little poll here. If you've never used Mentimeter, it's pretty easy. If you go to this website here at the top, www.menti.com, and type in this code that you see here on the screen, you can do this on a phone, you can do this on a computer, on a tablet, whatever device you're joining from today. You should see this question pop up, where do you live? And you can just go ahead and tap that map and it'll drop a pin on where you are at. And this will start to fill in here for as everybody does this. If you live outside of this area, you can just click off the map, click on the edges, something like that, or don't add a question. Since we are doing this for the North Central region, I just kept the map to a little bit more reasonable of an area. So you can already start to see here on the map, we have people joining from all across our region, right? So we're talking about the 13 North Central states, from North Dakota down to Kansas, east all the way across to Kentucky and back up through Ohio and Michigan, everything in between, right? So this whole area is what we'll be covering here today. So we can come back to this here in a little bit, but you can go ahead and keep popping those points on the map. In the meantime, we'll get back to our presentation here. But that map is still live and active. All right, so when we're thinking about snowfall in the North Central US, it's really dependent on where we live, right? And how we want to, we've got somebody drawing on the screen here, how we want to think about this. Historical climatology, we start to say, well, how much snow do we get? How many days does it snow? When is our first snow? When is our last snow? What is the most amount of snow we've ever had? These are all the kinds of questions that come to mind when we start to think about how we characterize snowfall in the US. And as you would think, really the answers come down to where specifically you live. You get this north to south gradient in snowfall. If you're close to the Great Lakes, you're going to have a lot different experience than if you live out in the Great Plains. So when we think back to our map of where everybody was located, wow, we really span the whole North Central US. And so we do have a lot of tools that answer these different questions that I have up here on the screen. And we could go one by one through those, and I could pull up a whole bunch of different tools, but I'm really excited to share with you that we actually developed a brand new tool. It's in the beta version, and you on this call today are going to be the very first ones to see this tool. And so we'll be able to go through all of these questions in a much more efficient way with the MRCC Snow Climatology Toolbox. All right, so like I said, you are the first to see this tool, and we're going to explore this tool, hopefully in a live demo that goes fairly well. And we'll be able to look at all of those questions of how we characterize snowfall in the North Central US. So what I love about this tool, I kind of think of it like the Swiss Army knife of snow climatology tools, because it's going to combine data from what you would currently find across 6 different MRCC products right now. And so this is really a much more efficient way to get at some of these questions. Not only that, but this has an interactive modern design to make the user experience a lot better than it would be in some of our other tools, our more legacy tools looking at snowfall. All of the data that we're looking at come from station level data sets. These are currently active stations, and they have to have at least 30 years of data. It's hard to come up with normals and averages and expectations of our climate when you start to get those shorter time periods. So we have at least 30 years of data in all of the stations in this tool, and also no more than 10% of missing data. Snowfall is one of those variables that it's going to be so influenced by the amount of data and the quality of data that you have. So, you start missing too many days in your observational data set, and suddenly you're going to miss that first snow. You're going to miss a big event. You're going to really have an impact on what you're seeing. So we tried our best to make this flexible, but also make it robust and high quality. And all of this is based on the most up-to-date information, the 1991 to 2020 normals. So I've listed here at the bottom of the screen the different variables that are found in this tool, but rather than doing that, we're going to go ahead and take a look. This will be what we see when I switch over here to doing the demo. Just a few things I want to mention first. Again, these are all going to be, this link will be provided in the resource sheet that I give you. I do want to say this tool, since it's beta, it's loading in a lot of data. We haven't gone through our efficiency programs yet to speed things up. So you got to be patient. Okay. Some of these maps might take several seconds to load, maybe 10, 15, 20 seconds to load. I'm hoping that for the demo, I've already loaded up the screen, so it hopefully won't be too much of a delay. But when you're working on it on your own, just keep that in mind. Be patient with this tool. The other thing I want to mention is that eventually this tool will move from beta and from this special link that you're going to get to be able to see this tool to a link on our website proper. And so that link that we give you today is going to go away eventually, probably in the next month or so. And then you'll be able to find this tool. It'll be open to everybody from the Midwestern Regional Climate Center webpage. Okay, enough caveats, enough of that. Let me go ahead and just get us started here on our tool demo. So hopefully you can see that. Okay, this is the Snow Climatology Toolbox. If you see your eyes across the top, these are all the different tools that you have options for. You can click on any one of them to be able to go to that particular tool. We're going to start on the left and then go to the right to move through everything. So here at the top, that's how you get to the data set of interest. It'll tell you here in the top left which map you're looking at. The dots on top are color-coded based on, in this case, normal annual snowfall. So normal, that's that 30-year period. And we've set the scale from 10 to 100. And so anything in this warmer purple color is going to be 100 inches of snowfall each year or more. And anything more like a white color is going to be 10 inches of snow or less. We have some stations that get over 200 inches of snow per year. Can you imagine that? And mostly because of that lake effect. And so if we weren't to adjust that, it really skews the map colors. And so that's what we have going on here. You can hover over any of the dots and you can see right away the location and the annual amount of snowfall. Now I keep saying annual amount. One of the new features that I would love to see in this tool would be to be able to see seasonal snowfall, right? So starting from October and maybe going through April, since that's how we, experience snowfall rather than in a calendar year. But right now it's based on the calendar year, January to December. And I should say, as you're going through this tool, and you'll have the link, if you have ideas like that, where you're playing around and you think, gosh, this tool would be so much more useful or could be even more helpful if insert your favorite suggestion, send it to us. We have our contact information down here. We want to hear this. We might even be able to get those features into the tool before we push the next iteration of it. Okay, so back to sort of orienting ourselves. We were working on the right. You can see the snowfall totals. We also have a slider tool, and I'm not going to click it because it can be a little bit slow to load, but you can type in or slide this back in time if you want to see stations that have an even longer period of record. So I actually opened this tab. So right now we're viewing all of the stations with at least 30 years. What if we go back to, say, the early 1900s? Oh no, it took it off for me. Well, we'll just click it and come back to it here in a moment. If you do that, you're going to see the dots on this map sort of disappear. It takes away those stations that don't have as long of a period of record. You might be saying, well, why would I want to do that? Well, we'll get to that here in a little bit when we start talking about some of these other metrics. It can be really helpful to see, well, gosh, did that station, was it even around during the 1967 blizzard that hit the Ohio Valley region, right? So sometimes it's useful to be able to see which data sets or which stations have that longer period of record. Okay, that one's still loading. Like I said, you got to be patient with some of these buttons. We're going to work on that for the final version of this tool. Okay, so what's really nice too is on any of these pages that you see, you can click on a value and you will see loaded below all of the data for that particular station. Now, sometimes you get a station like this and you say, well, gosh, what happened here after the 1940s? Why, or before the 1950s? What's going on with this data set? To me, that says we need to maybe look into this station a bit more. You're not going to find very many of these. We're just pulling the data, the quality control data that are there, but that doesn't guarantee they're perfect. If we come up here to Herman, Michigan, you can see their data set goes back to 1968. If you hover over each of these individual bars, you can see for that year how many inches of snow they had. Wow, they've had some years 355 inches of snow, or as little as 111. As little, that's kind of funny, as 111 inches. Here where I live in West Lafayette, well, that was Lafayette, pretty close to West Lafayette. You can see how much variability we get in our snowfall year to year. We plot that normal, that average value that you would see if you hover over the dot. You can also see where we're missing records, right? This particular station goes back to 1901 with snowfall records, but there were a few years in there where we don't have data. That's just the nature of snowfall. Sometimes those records and keeping those observers can be a tricky task. Okay, so I'm sure I have not yet moused over your favorite region. And again, that's why I'm going to provide you a link to this tool and you can explore it yourself. So that's our normal annual snowfall. We also have normal monthly snowfall at a glance. So here, same idea. The dots will be a color based on the amount of snow. You can change how long the stations of record are that display in the map. And you can also choose what month you want to display. So right now we have it starting in October. But we can go to November, we can go to December. You can see how these start to change on the map. Oops, I missed January there, February. And you can just kind of see how it changes across the region. Back to May, we're not going to have very much as we go. So if I just click for an example on February, the same kind of functionality as before, where if you hover over a point, you can see that amount. If you click on a specific point, what you get here is a histogram that shows you that month by month view for that particular station. So maybe you're interested not so much in the spatial pattern, but more for that station, what the actual data are. Well, you can just click on any point. I'll, pick on, let's see, Clay Center, Nebraska. And we can see they get their most snow here in February with just 5.9 inches on this particular station. Maybe we can come to a location in Michigan. We see their peak happens in January, and we can see, they get snow, recorded snow, October all the way through May. So there's a lot of great information that you can glean from this tool. We can look at number of snow days. And what's really neat here is you get the same concept. We're on the map. You get the colored dots that kind of give you that quick at a glance view, but you also have the ability to change how much snow we're talking about. Right now we have it set to a trace of snow or a 0.1 inches, and we should probably label this now that I'm looking at it to show these are snow amounts in inches. I can change this to be 1 inch if I wanted to. I could keep it at half an inch. I could go back to 1/10 of an inch. All of those are possible. We click on any particular station, and just like before, you get a time series showing you for the whole period of record each year how many number of days had at least 1 inch of snow. Okay, so they had 36 days in 2008 that had at least 1 inch of snow, right? So that's a lot of snow. As little here in Plymouth as just 6 days with 1 inch of snow back in 2006. Now, if we go on to first snow date, this is always, this has been an interesting question this year as we started the fall really, really warm. And really we've gone, November was more seasonal, as you would expect for temperatures, but it was very dry. And then we get into December and we've been pretty warm still. We haven't had very much snow. I know here in West Lafayette, we did have our first 1/10 of an inch of snow. It barely stuck to the ground. It was not around for very long. And we had people saying, how early or late is this compared to what we would expect? Well, that's what this particular tool is trying to help us do. So again, when you look at the colors, those warmer colors, that's earlier in the year or earlier in the season, right? So October, and those whiter colors would be more like January. So we can see this very clear north to south gradient, which makes a lot of sense, right? It's colder in the north, warmer in the south. So that's nothing surprising. If you click on an individual station, what's really fun here is that you actually get a histogram showing the earliest for that station, the latest, and everything in between, right? How is that first snow date actually distributed, right? So we could see the average, we can see the median, we could see how much range we have in that average first snow. You also can view that on a map with this drop down. If you really want to see the earliest, you could do that. I will say I am suspicious of this point out here in North Dakota. And so what's really nice about this tool right now, I can go ahead and just exclude that from my map. So it's not completely throwing off our color scheme here. And we can look at spatial patterns this way. And again, we can adjust the amount of snow. If we want to look at latest or anything like that, we can do that too. Last snow has the same exact capabilities as first snow. We're just working on the opposite end of the season. Okay, so now we're looking at how, on average, how early do we stop seeing snowfall in the year? How late does it happen? We can see earliest and latest on record for that station. Right, and again, this is where using that data availability toolbar might be really helpful. If a station only has 30 years, well, that's useful for calculating an average. When we start talking about extremes, earliest and latest, it is useful to have a longer period of record. Okay, so that's when, like before I was showing you, if we clicked on 1904, for instance, you can see a lot fewer stations available compared to if we see the last 30 years, okay? So then you can really start to find stations that maybe it makes sense to look at some of these extremes, that earliest and latest. Okay, last one we'll go through on this tool is the record 24-hour snowfall. So these are the highest amount of snowfall measured in a 24-hour period for that specific station. And similar to the other tools, if you click on a location, you can see a time series that goes back and you can see year by year how much snow had fallen. Again, I would love to see this option to see seasonal and not just seeing that annual average, because that can give you a different picture because we experience winters as seasons, right? The end of one year, the start of another. I will say, and this kind of leads us in back to our presentation, when we're looking at 24-hour snowfalls, these aren't necessarily the absolute records that you can have for the whole state, right? What is the most extreme 24-hour snowfall that we've had in Michigan? Well, if we hover over the dots, we see 32 inches in 1985 for that station. We see 30 inches in Flint. We see 25 inches in Benton Harbor Airport. But remember, these are only showing us active stations with at least 30 years of data, no more than 10% of missing data. There are a lot of other measurements that have been taken around that state and around the region that might be useful if we're talking about extremes. And that's where, coming back to our presentation and moving on from the toolbox, that's where the State Climate Extremes Committee would come in handy. All right, so if you are interested in knowing what is the most extreme weather or climate event that has happened, that's what you'd want to be looking at. You'd want to come to this tool here. So it represents the most extreme measurements ever recorded in a state. These are highly scrutinized, highly verified records. They can include NOAA data or non-NOAA data sources, okay? It convenes a whole committee. They write extensive reports talking about checking the calibration of the instrument and the siting of the location. I mean, they really, to become an extreme record, it takes a pretty big deal. Every state has 5 core parameters that are available. You can see them here in the map. Those are snow depth, maximum temperature, minimum temperature, 24-hour precipitation, and 24-hour snowfall. But depending on the location, there are 17 other possible measurements that could be found in the State Climate Extremes database. And so again, when we were on the Snow Climatology Toolbox, we looked at that record 24-hour snowfall, very helpful for that individual station, but it might not be the absolute extreme. That you'd want to use the State Climate Extremes Committee data. Now here's the website where you can find that. The data are provided in a sortable table, so you can filter it out by state and by parameter. So for sake of this presentation, I went to their website and I wanted to know just the snowfall records. So what were the most extreme 24-hour snowfall records? The Weather Channel had a beautiful map that I borrowed here to display it. They don't have maps on their website. I did put into a table for those states that you see on the screen, what date those happened. So looking at just focusing on our north central region, South Dakota definitely comes in with the winning 52 inches of snow in a 24-hour period. I couldn't even imagine that. And looking at the table here, that happened March 14th, 1973. What's interesting, we have some very long-standing records. Look at this one from Illinois. This record has held on since 1900, February 28th, 1900. Illinois received 36 inches of snow. Where I live in Indiana, we've only had 33 inches, which is pretty amazing. If you look at a place like Michigan, which gets a whole heck of a lot of snow, the record there is just 32. So even though they have that lake effect, they get a lot more annual snowfall, they don't have the highest 24-hour record compared to the other north central states. So that's snowfall. And I had told you this database also includes snow depth. So I don't have a fancy map for this one, but I did go ahead and put all of these on a table. The state is listed here in the first column. Second column, that shows you snow depth. third column shows you when it happened, and the fourth is where, what city. So the snow depth, it can be, every day they would go out, they measure snow depth. It could be an accumulation. Say you had snow 5, 6, 7 days in a row, or multiple storms, and it just stayed cold and that snow just piles up. That's what we're talking about with snow depth. Now, I was shocked and I couldn't quite wrap my brain around it when I saw Michigan had a record snow depth of 117 inches. That's almost 10 feet. I don't even know how you would measure that. So that happened in 1948 in Eagle Harbor. Similar to the snowfall records, we have some pretty long-standing records. This one here in North Dakota goes back to 1897, and that was 65 inches. I also found it interesting that the time period of when these record snow depths had occurred spanned from November all the way to April. I just found it interesting, right? It was November, December, January, February, March, April, all of those throughout the north central US had a record snow depth happen in one of those months. Okay, so now that we're talking about extremes and we're about halfway through the talk, I always start to wonder if people are still there, if we're still awake. I want to get you involved again, and I'm curious as we continue to talk about severe winter situations. I'm wondering, what was your most memorable winter season? And so I'm going to go ahead and slide back over this browser so we can look at it. Here's our "Where did you live?" question. So we, just as we saw before, we have quite a few people from across the region. Now we're going to go on to, we've reached the end of the presentation. There we go. What was your most memorable winter season? So if you go to menti.com, you can type in this code again, or if you already had it up on your screen, you should be able to just refresh and see the next question. You can put the year and the location, that would be great, or the name of the storm, that works too. What was your most memorable winter season? And as we are seeing these answers pop in, let's think about what it takes for a winter to be memorable. Certainly there are a lot of different ways to measure, right? It could be blizzard conditions. And so those high winds, that blowing snow, those whiteout conditions, ice storms, right? That's another way that winter can be extremely memorable, particularly if it's in a location that is not as accustomed to winter weather, and maybe they're not as prepared. I don't know of anywhere that would love to see a major ice storm, but I think it's more crippling in certain locations. How else might we define a memorable winter? Well, if it happens on a particular holiday or at a time of the year when we're not expecting it, it really could be based on the amount of snow that fell. It could be based on the types of impacts that happen, maybe the wind speeds, all these different ways, right? I'm just going to go ahead and scroll down. We can see more of these answers. And so if we're looking at the years here, 97, 96, 2013, 2016, 81, right? So we're seeing a pretty big range of people's memories. I've heard people say before, when it comes to extreme events, you remember your first, your worst, and the last one you had. And so, think about yours. Was yours the first, the worst, or the last one you had? Does it fall into any of those categories? I don't know. It's just what I've heard. So, we have somebody who lives in Herman. So every year is fun. I would think so. I hope you have a really good snowblower or a lot of neighborhood kids who get paid a lot to continuously shovel snow. All right, so feel free to keep popping in these answers of what is your most memorable winter season. And while we do that, we're going to go ahead and transition to talking about historical snow, big events, big impact events kind of thing. So what I have here, I've called it operational historical snow tools. So what do I mean by that? Well, I would say what we were previously looking at with the Toolbox and with the State Climate Extremes Committee, those were really climatology tools. We weren't looking at anything in real time. It wasn't taking in this year's information. It was really just giving us a picture of snowfall based on past experiences. These next two tools I want to talk about, the Regional Snowfall Index and the Accumulated Winter Season Severity Index, Aussie is what we call that. It's pretty awesome. These are two tools that give us a historical perspective of our current situation. So the Regional Snowfall Index is going to be winter storm based, and that Aussie tool is going to be winter season based. So I love both of these tools. I hope you do too. So let's look at the Regional Snowfall Index. This is put together by NOAA's NCEI division. That's the National Centers for Environmental Information. If you're familiar, it used to be called NCDC. So sometimes you'll see, like here in the URL, it'll still say NCDC. That is otherwise known as NCEI, right? We're working with government tools. We have a lot of acronyms, but just note that these two are the same, okay? NCDC, NCEI. So in all of the earlier products, we were talking about these individual stations, but now let's think about snowstorms as events, right? As big events that happen over the course of a few days, affect lots of spatial areas. And so this tool, the Regional Snowfall Index, this is a tool, there's a typo there, tool for placing, not place, placing snowstorms and their societal impacts into a historical perspective on a regional scale. So what the index does, it will look at the spatial extent of a storm, right? How big it is across a geographic area, the amount of snow it produces, and interestingly enough, the population that it affects. And then it takes that information and it compares it to the whole past record, and it rates each storm on a scale of 0 to 5. And if you look at this table at the bottom, 5, a category 5, just like would we be talking about hurricanes or tornadoes or earthquakes, right? The bigger the number, the more severe and rare the event, the lower the number, the less severe and the more common the event. So looking at this table, you can see the category 5 here on the top. In the middle column, it shows that raw RSI, Regional Snowfall Index score, which may or may not mean very much to you. I think what's more important is how they map it to the category. And then the approximate percent of all storms that would be classified this way. So again, we're really showing that not all storms are created equally. And the severe storms are very rare, right? 1% approximately of the storms throughout the historical record met this threshold. This tool covers 6 regions that across the eastern 2/3 of the US. Okay, so they don't have the mountain areas or the West Coast. It really takes the eastern 2/3 of the US, you can see on this map, and divides it into 6 regions. And then each region has its own specific calculations for the indices. So location-specific parameters and thresholds, right? Some amount of snow that affects Upper Michigan, that same amount of snow affecting the Southeast is going to have a lot different impact on the population affected. Or you can think of it, you know, the amount of population out in one region versus another, that's going to scale the index differently. And so all of these things are taken into account. What's amazing is that they have actually analyzed over 500 storms using this index going back to 1900, and they add new storms in real time. All right, so let's dig into the tool. There are 2 ways to look at the data that come from this tool. You can look at it in tabular form or on a map. So if you look at it on tabular form, when you go to that URL that I provided on the last page, and that'll be in the resources handout, at the top, you see the RSI and societal impacts. I've highlighted it here. You click on that. You end up with a table view similar to what you see here. You can select from the drop down the region of interest. Remember, there's 6 regions. Unfortunately for us, our region that we're talking about here today is actually covered by multiple different regions, but it is what it is. The table is sortable. And so you can click on any of those headings and it's going to organize the table. I've organized it here based on category. So this has the most extreme, actually, no, I based it on RSI. So this has the most extreme RSI index, and it was mapped to a category 5. We're looking at the upper Midwest. There have been 1, 2, 3, 4 storms that they've analyzed that met this criteria. 2 of them in 1985. Yuck. What else is interesting is in the right-hand columns, you get the area of snow for the entire storm and the population for the entire storm. But you can sort that. You see here where hopefully you can see my mouse. If not, I'll highlight it. So this is the same table. I'll toggle back and forth so you can see what happened. This is the same table, but now I want to see the amount of area or the population that was affected by maybe 3 inches of snow or 4 inches of snow, or in this case, I clicked on 21 inches of snow. And so you can see over 1.5 million people were affected by this particular storm with 21 inches of snow. And the area here was 12,406. I would love to know what that unit is. I'm guessing it's shown on a different page. So this is how you get to the tabular view and what that means. If you go up here, you can see a highlighted overview. There's going to be a link on that overview page to view the map. And so on the map, this is a view you might get. I went ahead and selected a recent storm just for example purposes. This was the February 13th through 16th storm that came across the Southern Plains, the Ohio River Valley. And so in the middle, you can see all of the different dots in the different regions outlined in red. The dots are showing where they had snow measurements. Over here to the left, it lists out each region, the category. For this particular event across the South, it was a category 3. You might remember this is one of multiple storms that affected Texas when they had their issues back in 2001. And the color-coded dots mean something. These are the inches of snow that fell. You can come up here to the top left and you can select the drop-down menu and you can just scroll back through time. I wish they would improve that interface a little bit more because there are 500 storms in there, but you can select by the time of year to then pull up your map. So I went ahead and went back to the blizzard of 1967. I would have to check on our most memorable winter season poll. I'm looking at it now on my other screen. I see quite a few people referencing the 1978 storm. I don't know if anybody referenced the 1967, but what was interesting here, if you look at the Ohio Valley, this was a category 5 storm. And so what does this actually mean in practice? Well, the Chicago National Weather Service had this great infographic talking about the blizzard of 67, just to give this a little bit of perspective on what a category 5 storm would mean. Chicago saw over 23 inches of snow, 53-mile-an-hour winds, 4 to 6 foot drifts, thousands of cars were stranded, hundreds of millions in damages or business loans, and over $1 billion in damages. So yeah, I'd say that was a pretty severe, high intensity, high impact type storm. Okay, so that is the RSI. Again, it's snowstorm based. And it's really putting that individual storm into historical context. Now, some people might be more interested in a seasonal perspective. And that's where the accumulated winter season severity index comes in. We call it Aussie for short, AWSSI, Aussie. So Aussie tracks and combines key weather variables into a daily index, which then puts a specific location's season into the historical perspective. And so it really helps us answer this question, how severe is this winter, right? I remember, this winter couldn't be nearly as bad as 1978. I remember that's being more severe, right? Those are the types of questions. So you can kind of track the current year, but also compare it to past years. This was developed by folks at the Midwestern Regional Climate Center and the National Weather Service, but it is hosted with the Midwestern Regional Climate Center on our website. And what it does is every single day, each individual station is assigned a point system based on their maximum temperature, their minimum temperature, their snowfall, their snow depth. And these points are then ranked every day to the past using this 5 category scale. So you can see the scale here in the lower right corner, a 5 being most extreme, a 1 being mild, and it's really mapped back to percentiles. So it takes the whole period of record, which goes back to 1950 in this case, and then it breaks it down into 5, right? Grouping together the most severe, the most extreme, severe, average by these different percentiles. All right, so what do you actually see when you go to the Aussie site? At first glance, you will see a map that looks just like this. I pulled this one yesterday, so we are looking at actual, real, and current data. You'll see this at a glance view in the center of the map here, just point by point. Those are all the locations where data are available. And you can see on the left-hand side a ranking of the different categories. If you click on a specific location, it allows you to open a chart where you can actually see a time series. So across the bottom is time, right? So here's our current day. If to the left is back in time, to the right is forward in time. That black line goes up to current day. These colors are showing us for all the past seasons, the range of possible outcomes. So if you hover over a specific part on the map, you'll get this table that pops up that shows you what has been for this point in the year, the highest, the lowest, and everything in between for this accumulated index. You can go ahead and also compare it to past seasons. So for this example, I just picked the 2013 and 14. This red line shows how it started out pretty average, but then it got pretty bad pretty quickly. And by January, it was severe and it stayed that way. I'm picking on Chicago, but we can look at the end of season Aussie map to see really all of these locations in the eastern part of the north central region had either an extreme or a record extreme season based on Aussie. Okay, I'm looking at my time and I'm realizing I better keep moving this along. So let's talk a little bit about real-time winter monitoring. So these next 2 tools don't really have anything to do with the historical climatology. We looked at all the station data. We looked at a couple of ways to put current season and storms into historical context. This section is really for anybody who is really needing real-time information. And so the National Weather Service has something called the Winter Storm Severity Index, not to be confused with Aussie, which is the accumulated index, okay, that we were just talking about. This is the Winter Storm Severity Index. And what's different about this is a forecast, an actual forecast for the upcoming few days of potential impacts of winter storms across the US. And so it's really looking at the types of human experiences we might have based on the amount of snow, how heavy is the snow, how much ice, how much flash freeze, blizzard, all of those things. Remember, we were talking earlier, how do we define a severity of a winter? Well, there's a lot of different ways. And so this tool is really trying to account for some of those most important ones: wind, ice, snow, and temperature. If you go to the tool, this is what you're going to see right up front. You can tell this is very much impact-based. So your map is shading locations that within the next, for this case, we're at 1 to 3 days, what types of impacts might they be experiencing? I pulled this map yesterday, so this is valid through Wednesday. For most of us across the north central region, limited impacts, minor impacts, maybe some really isolated areas of moderate impacts. And you can read the descriptions here on the site. But again, what's important to remember about this tool is impact focus. So it combines all the different parameters that could make a severe situation into an index to communicate the severity of impacts. I've highlighted here on the screen, you can see days 1 through 3 combined. You can look at each day, day 1, day 2, day 3 individually, and they even have an experimental day 4. And across the top, we're looking at overall impact, but you can toggle across and see, okay, is this overall impact really going to be driven more by snow amount, snow load, ice? You can view maps just like this for all of these different parameters. Now, after a snowstorm happens, you might be interested in Snowfall Reports. The National Weather Service has a great interface to find reports from anywhere from the last hour up to the last 72 hours. I just find this a really quick and easy way of getting those real-time data points. And so what you see here, I pulled this last week when there actually was snow going on. You could slide this little bar all the way up to 72 hours, and the dots on the map and the amounts in the table are going to change to show you how much snow accumulated during that time period. There are some other resources, great resources for getting snowfall data that goes beyond 72 hours, and I included those in the handout that you'll receive after this presentation. All right, let's wrap things up now with a weather and climate outlook. And I know a big question on a lot of people's minds, just with the holiday season upon us, is whether or not we're going to have a white Christmas. I must say, this is not a forecast. I can't say it enough, so I put it in red on this slide. This is not a forecast. What we're looking at here is just based on the historical data record. What is the probability of there being at least 1 inch of snow on the ground on December 25th? Now, that's just one way of measuring a white Christmas, right? Snow already on the ground. You can also get snow falling from the sky. This particular tool just focuses on snow depth. So 1 inch of snow on the ground, whether it fell that day or some previous days. And as you'd expect, there's this lovely north to south gradient where our friends up here in Herman, Michigan are almost certainly going to have a white Christmas. Down here where our host for this webinar, Hans, is located, tough luck, buddy. Less than 10% chance in any given year. And I land, up here somewhere a little bit, not quite in the middle. So that is the probability of having a white Christmas. Obviously, any specific year is going to be determined by the types of weather patterns that are going on. And so if we look at the forecast, just short term here, I pulled these this morning from the National Weather Service. These are forecasts for Christmas Eve, so Friday. On the left here, we're looking at what is the forecast high temperature. The warm colors, we're talking 60s and 70s. Yellows are 50s. Even in our cold part of the region, we're talking 30s to 40s. So it's really going to be looking like a mild Christmas Eve. If we come down here in the bottom right, this is just telling us what type of predominant weather we can expect. There is rain forecast, maybe not at a very high probability, but there's a rain forecast for the eastern part of the region, some snow potential in the upper part of the region, but really not very widespread. And if we look at Christmas Day, very similar with these unseasonably warm temperatures and not very much going on in the way of precipitation. Now, you might be wondering, with these warm temperatures, is this common? Have we had this before? We actually have a tool for that. This is probably one of my favorite tools. I'm pushing to get this made into an actual tool rather than just a feature within our Climate system. If you're not familiar with Climate, you can come to this website, get a free account, and you have access to all sorts of really interesting data tools. And so what we have here in this day in history, it's a quick and easy way to find climatology for a specific day of the year, including about 40 different holidays or notable days. And so, for instance, I just picked on Minneapolis-St. Paul, and just to mix it up a little, I said, well, let's look at New Year's Day. Let's not look at Christmas because, we want to give some variety here in the talk. So New Year's Day, and you can see here on the table, we have the different variables. You can see how far back the record goes, how much data are available. what the average is for each of those variables, and then your record, how high and how low. So for snowfall on New Year's Day, the highest amount of snowfall at this station in Minneapolis, St. Paul, was 4 inches. I think what's even more interesting though on this table is this minus 30-degree minimum temperature. Ooh, that's going to be a cold New Year's party. All right, and finally, the official Climate Prediction Center outlooks came out last week. What we're showing here is January. We're looking like we have equal chances for it to be near normal, warmer than normal, or cooler than normal in January. Precipitation is equal chances of any of those events, except for in the eastern part, we're looking at maybe a slightly enhanced chance of being above average precipitation. For January, February, March, for that 3-month period, we're looking possibility of being above average in the east, but really unsure what's going to happen out in our western part of the region. Same with precipitation to the east. We're talking about enhanced chance of above average. Not really sure for, we're giving it equal chances of above, below, or normal in the west. And this is really focused on a La Nina pattern. And so La Nina just means that we have cooler than expected temperatures in the waters in the Pacific Ocean around the equator. And it changes the global weather patterns. And for our part of the world, you know, this is your setup. Out to the west of our region, we tend to get cooler, tend to be a little warmer. In the eastern part, a little wetter. And again, that's pretty much what we're showing here. What does that mean for snowfall? It's really hard to say. Each La Nina event is so different from one another, but when we average them across all La Ninas, we do see that there is a tendency for slightly above average snowfall across the upper part of the region, but really near average for everyone else. All right, I have given you a ton of information. I see there's been some questions coming into the chat, so maybe Hans, if you want to tell me if there's any ones that we can answer here. If we don't get to it, certainly reach out. Here's my phone number and email. Yeah, and with that, I'm just gonna kick it back over to you, Hans.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. That was great. I have launched a poll for folks to answer, and just wanted to let you all know these webinars have been in the past somewhat agriculturally focused, so that first question may not apply to you, and we're aware of that. There have been 2 questions come in the chat, and I'll ask them in order. Back when you were covering the beta version of the climatology tool, Christina asked specifically, are you able to adjust the range of years for all the stations?
So you can adjust, you can look at the period of record, but not necessarily the range of years. And so each station has its own period of record. And so it might be a little bit tricky to force it to only show time between, you know, say 1950 to 1980. I think it's possible, but we need to think a little bit more about what that would actually give you, if it would give you meaningful information, or if maybe that would be something that once you click on it and you see the time series, you can isolate it that way. So I'm going to say not right now, but it's certainly a possibility.
All right. And then Bill's question came in during Aussie. Why does that particular severity index only go back to 1950?
That is a good question. I think I would have to follow up on that. I was not here when that one was developed, but my guess is just the number of stations that had enough period of record. So you'll remember on our tool, when we look on the toolbox at the beginning, when we look at how many stations we have, if we look at just 30 years of data, you go back to 50 years of data, it gets less. If you go back even further, you're looking at even fewer stations. And so I think they were probably, if I had to guess, trying to balance between how far back in time they could go without suddenly not having a whole bunch of stations available, right? They were trying to maximize the amount of locations that they could actually do that tool for. That would be my guess.
All right. That answers the questions that we had in the chat. We are at the top of the next hour, so certainly don't want anyone to feel like they have to stick around. Melissa, if you're available to stick around in case there would be any questions to come through for a couple minutes, that'd be great. Otherwise, we appreciate you attending today. Do want to give a shout out to Laura Edwards at South Dakota State, who is also on the leadership team for the North Central Climate Collaborative. We'll be coming back at you again at the end of February with another webinar, topic to be determined. It's been a roller coaster of a year, and we've got some ideas, but we don't have it finalized yet to share with you, but be looking for it in the near future. Happy holidays, everybody.